All right, getting the live stream started. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Dopamine, the show that is like winter. It just won't go away. I think I might have used that one already. I'm not really sure. Today on the show, I wanted to talk about triggers and your environment. What I mean by that is identifying what either emotional states or situations in our life that are giving us extra difficulty, little things that are triggers in our life. Do we need to identify what those are, and how should we do that? Should we test things? And really, it's a practice of listening to yourself and learning about your own emotional states. It could be loud noises. It could be the way someone talks to you. It could be certain words. It could be a type of person. It could be an environment. It could be general loud noise. It could be a type of music, things like that. So I wanted to kind of go into that a little bit and talk about our environment and how that affects us. So without further ado, I'm going to play that intro. Let's do it.
Drums, please.
North, west, south, west, side, right, yeah. Now here it is.
All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the show. This is C-Note, your host, Mr. Christian Rivera. And I've got a little bit of music playing in the background, so if it is too loud, please let me know. I am doing this on Facebook Live on my personal page. I thought I would do this on my personal page at the moment, doing it live here, because more people are going to probably be watching, and I want to be able to take questions and do this on here until, people start to stream into the Facebook page. And if you are not following the Facebook page, facebook.com/dopamine podcast, so you could see all of the latest podcast updates and some questions, and then I'll post the completed video version of this episode as well. So today I wanted to talk about triggers in our environment. This is something I've been thinking about for a long time. It's something that I mostly want to share my story with this because it's something that I've been slowly identifying and developing and learning about as I go through my personal mental health journey. Some of my personal triggers are loud noises, very, very loud, abrupt noises, any kind of pain, and any kind of abrasive, unwelcomed personality. I think that's a lot of they're triggers for some people, but the difference between a trigger and simply just getting upset is that a trigger for me means that my emotional state is compromised for an extended period of time. Because I have a mood disorder called cyclothymia, for those of you who are not keeping up with that part of it. I have it's a low-grade bipolar disorder, which essentially is a swing between manic and depressive states. So sometimes those states are triggered by different things in an environment, different discussions with people, or different just different things either in my environment or in my life. So high stress of any kind can be considered a trigger. And I wanted to talk about triggers because there is a unfortunate misconception socially about what a trigger really is. People talk about politically like, oh, they're triggered and they're freaking out. And, people associate being triggered with like snowflakes and being pansies and being sensitive and things like that. And often it isn't about someone being sensitive or being offended. It is about literally a emotional switch. I shouldn't even say it's an emotional switch. It's a mood switch. You could switch from being depressive to mania in a matter of hours because of a certain trigger, in my case. Or you could go from a certain level of calm and then be triggered by by different things in our environment. So if you don't like loud noises, if you don't like interruptions, those are different things to kind of consider when you're looking at your environment and the triggers involved in there. So in my past, I've dealt with a lot of situations where I haven't been the greatest living with people. I haven't had the greatest luck living with animals or anything that's like kind of unexpected, because they'll bark or make noises or do things that you don't expect, and it can cause a loss of control and create a certain kind of freak out. Some people are more sensitive to smells. So if you're sensitive to your own smell, shower more. If you're sensitive to other types of smells or environments, be careful of that too. Certain restaurants might have a very pungent smell, or going to the gym or something like that might have a very, very intense, it's at its core, as I talk about this, at its core, it's about being overwhelmed, and the difference between, with a trigger, it's about being overwhelmed suddenly, and triggered suddenly with something that you're more likely to be sensitive to because of something in your past, or something that involves a current mental state, or something that you've dealt with. So in my case, I'm way, very sensitive to someone who tries to exhibit some sense of control over me, whether that's emotionally or at a job or something like that. So I've never been very good at having a boss, because I will get very upset when someone tries to just tell me to do something for the sake of them doing something, for them to exert their control, rather than having some sort of plan or a why behind it. Just exerting their sense of authority, rather than being respectful, and that is a big thing for me. Not even just with my mental health, but as a personality. I don't appreciate when someone wants to try to steamroll me. I'm just not that kind of person. My parents have always instilled the whole, like, don't mistake my kindness for weakness sort of mentality in me. So that becomes a very sensitive topic for me. And I've been in situations where I've allowed myself to become susceptible to different degrees of control, whether it's emotional or physical. And in most cases, it's been emotional for me. In the sense that, like, you're not allowed to talk to certain people, you're not allowed to have certain kinds of relationships, or you're not allowed to focus on your dreams, or people basically consistently knocking you down and belittling you and not making you feel good about your personality, your hopes, your dreams, things like that. For me, that's it's not an immediate trigger, but it's something that, well, now it's more of an immediate trigger, I should say, because I experienced that slowly over time, and now I can see all of the little nuances and all of the little details that come with that, when that's starting to sink in. As I'm starting to look back and analyze all of the little details in my personal life that have led to me feeling a certain way, to feeling that feeling of entrapment or control, I can now look at those little details and see when someone is trying to assert that onto me. Other things to consider in your environments are a light. Too strong of a light. Like, I've had issues in my past at jobs that I've had too much of fluorescent lights going on, coming from the ceiling. Very, very well lit space, and people like that, but I've always been very sensitive to light. As you can see, I don't have the best vision, and that can be something that has had an emotional effect on me personally. It affects my focus, it affects my ability to function, and it's been very hard to exhibit that or share that with a boss or at a job when that sort of thing happens. They're not as they're more likely to think of the whole as opposed to the individual, which is me. They're not going to give me a private office because I can't focus because of the light. It becomes more of a dictatorship in that sense, and that's why I've had a little bit of a hard time with jobs. Another one I had in mind but I just lost it. But a lot of the things that I've had in mind were based on like office scenarios, because at home we have a little bit more control over the things that we can be surrounded by. In terms, we can control the temperature of the room, which is another thing to consider. You can control in a lot of ways, the amount of noise going on. Depends on the situation. Sometimes kids make that a little bit more difficult, or having animals makes that a little bit more difficult. But when you go into a job environment, it becomes even more difficult to be able to control what's going on. You have to speak up more. If you're a person that is not comfortable speaking up or making any kind of noise in that sort of confrontational sense, it's going to take some persistence to make some changes. I know a lot of people that watch me here are types that have their own business and are not necessarily working in an office environment, but I'm sure we all have at some point, and have our own experiences to share, which is why I wanted to talk about it. It's kind of interesting. So in that sense, another thing to consider is the type of food you're eating. That's an episode I want to do in the future. That's not going to be a solo episode, but I recently did a recording with Victoria Teasdale about her empowerment coaching, and she talked a little bit about how food can kind of affect your mental state as well. And that's been very true for me, and I need to be a little bit more a little bit tougher on myself when it comes to eating the right foods and taking care of myself, because I've just been eating a lot of crap lately, and I feel like that's contributing to a poor mental state. And so with Victoria Teasdale, we're going to get together and do an episode specifically dedicated to food and how we can consider the different types of foods that are in our lives, especially processed foods and things that are common in there. She talked a little bit very briefly about how soy has affected her son, and corn was one thing that has a certain effect on some people. So it would be kind of interesting to kind of break that down and see if there's any validity to that, as well as some things to consider, because that's a kind of a trial and error thing, right? When it comes to food, we don't always just know from going to the doctor what's going to affect us, especially from an emotional standpoint. That can be very difficult. Another thing to consider is ergonomics, sitting up straight in your posture, blood flow to your brain. That's something that I've also had a problem with. I've had a lot of issues. This chair that I'm sitting in currently is not very comfortable, and I can't stay in it for very long, and I have a bit of a problem with that. And so I need to practice sitting up straight a little bit more, and making sure to kind of do some neck stretches, and kind of just stretch your body a little bit. One little thing that I've given people tips on as to how to just feel a little bit better, especially if you're sitting in a chair all day, is to just put your arms up in the air and just for 10 seconds, and you'll get a little bit of a different kind of internal feeling. You'll get better blood flow, get better blood flow, and it'll kind of throw some endorphins into the situation there, and make you feel at least a little bit better temporarily. I find that it's pretty helpful. So if you're just sitting around doing nothing, do that for a second, and maybe that'll help you a little bit. So right now I'm close to the 15-minute mark. So this is about when I would normally end a podcast, but I see some better butt flow. That's funny. So I'm going to go through some of the comments here. So Molly says, I'm super sensitive to smells, and noise can also be a trigger for me. If there's more than one thing making lots of noise in the environment, I get overwhelmed. And yeah, it's about being overwhelmed. I find that the trigger aspect is about being overwhelmed. I think some more introverted types might have an issue with that. And even if you're classified as an extrovert, there are still some things that could affect you in terms of being overwhelmed. There's varying levels of extroverts. It's not just I love noise and people and things, but some people seem to really, really love being loud, or they feel like that's their natural way of being. So it's really hard to kind of, maybe you have to be careful when you're around those types if you're more of an introvert and can't handle that kind of overwhelmed feeling. Conversely, someone who is more of an extrovert might have a little bit of a hard time being by themselves. So they might need to cultivate a life that is around more people. and a situation where you can talk more or make more noise and kind of thrive in that. It's really, again, about personal preference. There's no one way to do this. And so Molly also shares. Molly lives with me, by the way. She says our apartment is the most calming home environment I've ever been in. It's crazy how much of a difference that makes. And it is, because I've also come from a situation that my previous home was very loud and a bit chaotic, and there was a lot of unwarranted noise. The TV was too loud, or the dogs were too loud, or kids yelling, or the environment, or we would have neighbors that were like doing construction work at like 8 a.m. And we also had animals in the neighborhood. So it was kind of like a little bit more of a rural environment. And there was a rooster at like 5 o'clock in the morning that would make noise if you left the window open. It would definitely wake you up. And you'd hear like goats and chickens and other things. And that works great for some people. Definitely not for me. I need a lot more control over my environment. And James says, one of the hardest things about being a full-time traveler is that it's almost impossible to control my environment. There's people everywhere, and it can really set me into a bad spiral. In some ways, it's been good. It's gotten me out of my shell a bit, but in a lot of ways, it's been super difficult. And yeah, especially if you're traveling a lot. That was something I had to consider when I was driving across the country. I did it twice, but I was staying in different hotels and different environments, and I'm very, very picky about where I stay, and I want to make sure that it's likely to be a good, comfortable environment. But you're likely to come across different personalities and different types of people. And for me, the reason I've been learning more about Myers-Briggs is so that I can more predictably work with people, or understand personality types, or get a feeling for which types I'm more likely to be comfortable around, or the environment that I'm comfortable to be around, and make the changes that I can when I can. But unfortunately, there's situations in life that don't allow us to take as much control over those scenarios as we wish we could. So I wish I'd thought ahead of time about like which tactics I can help you with in terms of like controlling that. But sometimes in my past I've just removed myself from the situation, respectfully, as respectfully as I could. I would, if the house was too overwhelming, instead of having a freak out, I would just excuse myself in some sense. Just go, I don't know, say I'm going to go to Starbucks for an hour, or I'm just going to go to a comic book shop or somewhere else, basically. James also says that earbuds are his best friend. And yeah, music is great. Music is a nice way to kind of just drown people out in a way. Or, find ways to just kind of exclude yourself from, everything else that's going on. Earbuds are good. You can even just get like noise canceling headphones, whether that's earbuds or, the big old cans. Sometimes the big can headphones, like these guys, are a little bit more obvious, especially when you're out in a social situation. It is really, really nice to put those on because people are less likely to bug you, unless they're a type that is like completely ignorant. But, you can always say no. And that's another thing that is a really, really good practice, is learning how to say no to certain types of people. Because sometimes when we say yes to something, we kind of open all sorts of doors to allow someone to continue to kind of enforce their perception of what they would like life to be, or that scenario or whatever. So, if I'm going into a situation that I know is going to be a little bit heavy, or I might have to check out. If I'm with Molly out at an event or somewhere where there's going to be a lot of noise, or like at a bar late in the day, and we know it's going to be intense, and we're with other people, in the sense that like she can still talk to people and still be entertained, I'll likely just kind of warn her in advance and say like, hey, I might have to step out for a second to regroup, or I'll just go to the bathroom and just kind of like hang in there for a few minutes and just kind of like recenter and take a breath. Again, those are more like specifically introverted things. But if you're someone who is more of an extrovert, I would love to hear what your version of that is. If you do get overwhelmed in social situations, or if you get overwhelmed if things are too quiet, I assume that that's what that would look like for an extrovert, is that it's too quiet, there's not enough action, and you start to feel anxious and anxiety because of that. Most of the stories I've heard are about people who are introverts dealing with that sense of anxiety or control in their environment. So I think this is a good spot to end. I don't know if anyone else who is watching has any questions. I'm going to take a quick sip. But I do appreciate that I could do this live with some people, and some people can join me and ask questions to kind of add a little bit of depth to these podcasts that I'm doing on my own, because I wing it most of the time. I pick a topic and then I just kind of talk about my own personal experiences. But it is really nice to hear other people's take on things. So I wouldn't have thought about the earbuds thing without James chiming in, and sense of smell without Molly saying something, and which is great. So think about your posture too. Think about your smell, not your smell and other people's sense of smell, and what the environment entails. The lighting in the environment. I like a nice, soft, natural light. If you're dealing with a situation at a workplace, please speak up, because if it's going to be affecting your mental health or your ability to work, that's important, because it'll affect your ability to function, your ability to do your job, and therefore might end up with you getting fired. That's happened to me in the past. So I'll tell a quick story before we wrap up, where I was working at a place where we switched buildings. So I was doing data management for Legend 3D, which was a great company, great people to work for. And I worked in IT, which was like top floor in the corner. It was kind of its own little cubby, separated from everyone. So I was only working with a few people, and that was fine. I was totally content with that. And I liked my back to the wall and the computer facing me, so that, I made little changes to do that. That kind of helped me be able to focus. But also, so what happened eventually is that we agreed as a group to like turn off the lights, which was very helpful for us because it was just overwhelming with all the lights. And then when we switched buildings, we moved to an open floor plan. So I was in the middle of a room with like 300 people, and that was not good. There was a lot of commotion, a little bit of noise, but also my back wasn't to the wall, so I was very unfocused. I was very much like scanning my environment, and like I didn't want anyone like creeping up on me or anything like that. And I just felt like I was easily accessible to disturbances, to anyone just bugging me for any old reason, and I started to fall apart mentally as a result of that. And the lights were just hugely bright. And I lost my chair, so I had to get a new chair, and that was frustrating as well. So I eventually fell apart. I made a couple of big mistakes, and they let me go, and that was very unfortunate. So while many of us who are either watching or listening are types that are starting their own business, those are still things to consider when you're trying to assess your performance and your ability to function as a business owner, as a creative, as a person that is, living day in and day out. We deserve to be able to cater our environment to us, and make little changes every day to make things better. I cannot wait to get a new chair. After this weekend, I'll be getting a stand-up desk, and this will be so much better. We'll be making little adjustments, and it'll be great. So that's basically it. Take stock in your environment. Be aware of your personal triggers, and just kind of like just listen to yourself as best as you can for when things are going to change in your environment. So Ed Holtzman says, IT gets no love. Your desk is back here in the server closet with the full ceiling fluorescence. Yep, we need a dark cave, basically. So with that, I appreciate you guys joining me. I'm going to be doing these twice a week. I'm just not sure what times just yet, so that I can record these new episodes, and then I'll be posting the replay on to Dopamine, so facebook.com/dopamine podcast, and I'll just keep doing this on my personal page for a little while, and then after that, we'll wing it and see how it goes. So thanks for joining me. I'll catch you guys next time. Take care of yourselves and each other. Peace.